that's the first thing. Okay, so what's the question about the assignment?
I just want to ask about the due date because it says here in their schedule that it's Monday, week 8, but in here it says Friday, week 8.
It doesn't really matter. I think in some sort of documents I might have put Monday because a lot of times, because what happens, sometimes I get the formal, what I do, I get a unit which is standardized. So it usually says Friday. But because I am a compassionate person and I understand that people take a weekend to actually finalize things, so in another document I mentioned Monday, and maybe I didn't actually cross-check. But submit any time between Friday and Monday and it will be just fine.
Okay, thank you.
So, and I have some other questions. Last night someone asked me, what if I write 1,101 words? Look, if you write 20,000 words, I'm very happy with it. I'm not fast. I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for I'm a structure person, so I'll be looking for any indications of critical thinking. So if you write 3,000 examples of how literate you are, to me, that's just, out of 5, that's just 1. Okay, you wrote examples, but you didn't understand what literate means. You need to now take a definition of what it means to be literate, apply it to your examples, and you're flying. That's why that definition is so important. Okay. So if you have 20,000 examples, I'll just look at the structure of them. I won't read them. I'll just look very quickly at the structure of the argument. So that's why I'm happy to cope with 20,000 words, because I don't necessarily have to read every example, but what I will do, I just will read through the structure. What's the argumentative structure? And that's what I look for, is not the charm of the assignment, but the thinking structure. And because I'm pretty much an expert in academic writing, I can look at the page and I know what you said there. I just look at it. Don't ask me how I do it. I have no idea. I must be like a chimp on that video. I just look and I see everything. So the word count doesn't worry me. Nobody should be stressing out. A lot of people are worried. Just don't write 500 words because you'd have to do it really well. I mean, if you can manage in 500 words and say it all, I'll have to have a look. So I'm not fussed about it. Just try to write more than your name and the surname. So there. So I've prepared everything except that I didn't bring the disc with me. So today we're going to play a little bit with our imagination. Okay. So last lecture had a title, I didn't really finish it because that was enough. We are talking about text, and the subtitle was What is not text? I'll have you know that this is a postgraduate question. But I don't understand why postgraduate students have to own thinking. You know how teachers are told to be reflective and critical, and yet we never actually show the teachers the tricks of thinking. So consequently what happens, teachers reproduce all the time. And I call it they work using the pedagogy by rumor. You know, someone said, but because for some inexplicable reason, recently undergraduate studies are shown as less intellectual than postgraduate. Consequently, what happens also, the tricks of thinking are not introduced. So I will not give you a course in semiotics, but I will give you a trick of thinking. So when someone says to you, what is text? You can ask yourself, well, what is not? Which is the same methodology I explained to you about meaning, that anything is a function of what it is not. because the more you can eliminate, the more precise you are here. So the meaning is not what it is, but what it is not. That is very important, because then you can see how students' histories impact on how they actually understand things or work with things. Anybody with no education will tell you tree is a tree. That's why they are not paid $80, $90, $100, $150,000 for that definition per year. It doesn't take an intellectual to tell you that tree is a tree. When you have little ones in your care and your own destiny in your hands, you never want yourself to act stupid, nor do you want to actually approach children without reflection. So tree is not a tree. Tree becomes, through the child's development, increasingly precise in the meaning as they engage through the process of elimination. So they interact, and all of a sudden they learn that there's something like bush, grass. I don't know, I'm not native in English, so I can't think of many words. Or anything, house. You can have a wooden house. Wood is not a tree. Bird is not a tree. So children become increasingly precise. By virtue of the fact that they can know what things are not. Ambiguity is when you can't differentiate. When someone shows you a picture where you cannot, where it's a bit blurry and you cannot distinguish one shape from another, you cannot eliminate what belongs to one and what belongs to the other. Ambiguity creeps in. So this is actually a lesson, course 1 in linguistics. Course 1, lesson 1 in linguistics. And that's the only thing you need to know and should know and never forget. Because this process of learning of what you exclude, we can call it development, construction of one's history. Right? What are you doing in these classes with me now? You went, well, Anya, I want to do reading, teaching children to read, and I'll put them in front of me, and then I'll do what my mother did and what they did to me in school, and well, my mother could tell you, but she's not paid $100,000 per year to tell you that. See? With money comes obligation. Someone pays me to make sure that you don't get education of the kind that if you got here, my 85-year-old mother, she'll just tell you. You know, you take your book, you know, you do that, right? All right, so what you're doing here, it's exactly this sort of movement. Reading was ambiguous. We're learning to differentiate what will assist reading and what will not, and on what grounds. So what we're doing now, we're telling you, you're learning what reading is by learning what it is not. And for example, in this example of what is a tree, you now learned that when you teach children, meaning is not about matching things. It's about children throughout their little life developing increasingly precise understandings in their little heads, what goes with what, and therefore what is what, by comparing and contrasting with other elements, so that precision is a function of elimination. For some inexplicable reason, this is Linguistics 1, Lesson 1, but for some inexplicable reason, even when I was studying, that was taught at the postgraduate level. I don't know why. At the undergraduate level, they keep teaching you verb, adjective. I mean, I learned it when I was 6 in primary school. I don't know for how long are we going to drill the same, this is verb, this is a noun. But this should be the lesson 1 in Linguistics 1 at the undergraduate level, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with meaning. So where does the meaning come from? And the reason why you're learning all these little tools and games with me, that's breaking down of things, this comparing and contrasting, which is what I use, is exactly because of this thing. And it was created by nobody else but the father of linguistics, Ferdinand Saussure. Don't make me write it, find it up. He was French. Saussure. I forgot how to spell him. Haven't written his name since my PhD. This is A. Ferdinand Saussure was teaching linguistics, invented linguistics, never wrote a book. Why? I don't know. I think, see, I remembered these things 20 years ago. Now I'm a little bit out of it. But I think he didn't write the book because he thought that knowledge is dynamic. And he wasn't so much full of himself, you know, like, just because I thought it and said it doesn't need to be written in stone. But his students wrote the notes, unlike my students. No, my students are doing really well on LearnLine. You realize that I'm going to copy and paste these things from my own memory. They're so good. I have checked actually postings on the postgraduate courses, what they have from students. Nothing like what we have. Absolutely nothing. They have like 5 lines of something like, okay, I did the posting, now let me go home. Right? And we have just marvelous, just amazing things. All right. So if you can see that for children to what we call make sense, they have to compare and contrast to eliminate ambiguity. You must remember from your life when you were little that you were mispronouncing things, but not because you couldn't pronounce, but because, I don't know. Look, put it this way. A pigeon in Polish, pigeons, plural, is wróbelki. But until I was 10, I could kill people. I used to call it grubelki, and it made sense to me. Probably my parents thought it was funny. Nobody corrected that form, ever. It was grubelki. I heard grubelki. It was grubelki for me. Instead of W, wróbelki, or V, I used to put G there. I don't know how I grew out of it, but it was a big disappointment to me when I found out I was getting it wrong. But that's just pronunciation, but we do it with meanings as well, with everything. That's what learning is. Learning is about creating concept by comparing, by building on other concepts, and see how these concepts can inform your concept. They inform it, they don't mean it, because tree is not wood, but wood informs tree. Tree is not house, but house informs tree. Tree is not bird, but bird informs tree, because it's not tree. Everything we know informs everything else that we are learning. That's what's called building on previous knowledge. You don't actually, very often, people assume that new knowledge is this, like a shopping basket, that things just get put into the child's brain. Boom, new thing. If that was happening, the bet of everyone is it wouldn't work, because there wouldn't be receptors in the brain. Nothing new can come in because there are no receptors. You cannot breathe, I don't know, I can't think of English words for those words sometimes, and coal or whatever, it is some other gas. Think of some other gas than oxygen. You can't breathe it because you don't have receptors for it. But you can adjust to lesser density of oxygen if you are in the Himalayas. Because you have receptors for it, all you have to do is to build on that what you have, and gradually you adjust to a lesser density of air. Right? So you can reorganize your system, but you cannot borrow a system from Saturn or Jupiter. So that reorganizing is nothing else that learning, or I had the perfect pen. Learning or reorganizing is about creating precise, meaning-making tools. I don't want to call it words because people fall into these conventional, let's call them words to know what we're talking about, but they are meaning-making tools because sometimes it's not the word that you use but the entire phrase because it fits in a particular, let's call it genre, it's always used. Like children say in the morning, "Good morning, Miss Smith." There's no word, it's an entire phrase. But in that particular genre of welcoming, you don't say good morning, you say good morning, Mrs. or Miss Smith. Right? So they are in control of a phrase, of a meaning-making tool. It's not a word, it's a phrase. But there's a ceremony, there are protocols, and in that protocol, it's a particular phrase to be used, and they learn its meaning by knowing what not to say. And that learning of what things are by eliminating what they are not is developing your own history. So Anya started when she was little, and by the time she went through her different experiences in different languages, and also through her honors, masters, PhD, she acquired increasing precision of these things. And the nightmare or ambition, call it what you want, of an academic or of a teacher is the same. Being precise, being coherent. Because you can have a meaning in your head, but now to actually work with it with people who are not in your head, it's not easy. So the meaning is a function, what things are is a function of what they are not. The more you can eliminate, the more precise you are about what you mean, about what things are and when to use them. It's a process. If it is a process, this means that when we teach reading or writing, we need to account for this process. We cannot take children who are extending the boundary and drawing a square and not a triangle, and we cannot just push them to here because we misread the curriculum. The curriculum cannot tell you all the bits that go in here. It truly trusts that you understand it. The curriculum in Australia and in all Anglo countries is built on trust. It tells you what is expected. It doesn't tell you how to get there. It does produce some lesson examples. I would strongly advise you not to trust them too much. Okay, so when we teach reading, we want to account for this process of what you call or people call meaning making, but what it is actually the process of children developing their own history on their own terms. Now, none of us is a magician. We're paid to be magicians, that's true, especially you in school. But we are not magicians. So any hypothesis now why I actually strongly suggest to use not just books, but technology in different activities and all of that? Any idea why I do that? Because I don't have the magical wand. I don't know what's in the head of 25 children. At any moment when they grapple with a task, I have no idea what questions they have on their mind. This is very different than what you're learning from Vygotsky and scaffolding. In those methods, people acknowledge that children construct, but then they put teacher in command of steps, as if the teacher knew how to guide children. That's because they haven't, those people, Vygotsky wrote that stuff 100 years ago. There was another guy, Bakhtin, but nobody reads Bakhtin because it's too challenging, although Bakhtin is coming in now. But it has to come in from America. Everything has to come from America. We have beautiful people in Australia. We don't read them. I mean, just because Anne Friedman is the most important and famous semiotician currently around, yeah, but she's Australian. They read her in America because what I'm teaching you, a lot of that work I actually learned from her writings. So when I have 25 children in my class, all of them within a different range of what's typically called capacities, what's typically called abilities, or even health. And that's why people say you have to do differentiated learning. How do you differentiated learning with Vygotsky when you have 25 people in your classroom? I would like to see a PhD on it, because I don't think anyone has actually answered that question. But when you don't commit yourselves to anyone's framework, but simply to your logical steps, which is people are different. Not only that, you're not a magician. You can't read what's in their mind. Sometimes you can do pretty good guesses, but you can't depend on guesses with 25 people in the classroom. So what you have to do is step away as a commander of a class. Now you do that, now you do that, now you do that, now you do that. It's like a Navy boot camp. And what I'm suggesting and what I'm doing, and I've seen it done since the, well, I wasn't around, but it's been done in University of Queensland in teaching French, and it's done by different people in isolated places. That's how academia works. What I'm suggesting to you is, rather than put yourself in command and make kids do things, give them tools with which they can play as they please. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that there will be no construction there, no creativity there, because if you listen to some other stuff that I have put on LearnLine inside of the modules, I strongly talk about project-based activities. But in order to actually go about a project, like even creating an audiobook, what I have seen in the past in students' assignments, not in my unit, but in some other people's units, what I have seen was where we're going to do the audiobook, right? So first, kids are going to do this, then kids are going to do that, then kids are... Who invents the process? How is that process accounting for 25 people who have different perception needs because of whatever place they are in now, currently in their life? And they are voice processing needs, there are perception of sound needs, there are language needs. They don't have to be ESL people. They also don't see the relevance of it very often. Just because you invented an activity doesn't make it relevant to a student. That's why I was suggesting before that you seduce them. You just have to be sometimes a mother, magician, father if you're a male. So you have to be a parent, magician, and a trickster. But you paid money for your job, and people say it's not enough. I think it's quite a lot of money, but you are paid money in order to do it reflectively. So if you think it's underpaid, don't take the job. But my position is if I take money, you've got to do it in a reflective way. So what we do in this methodology where we actually try to account for differentiation, we give children tools to explore themselves in the task. Because at the end of the day, any learning is about them. When they explore themselves in the task, like you explore yourselves in your postings on LearnLine. And notice I go bananas, especially when I see this deep reflection, what it did to me. What it did to me, it made me think about mathematics, it made me think about the multiplication tables, right? Anyone who's doing maths, and you guys are doing maths, there's this brilliant mathematician, I don't know whether he's Australian or American. I watch these things and then I sort of codify them and I forget. But there's this guy who believes that numbers are something like from 1 to 7 or 1 to 9 or something. And then he shows people one trick and how with this particular trick you can calculate anything. You don't have to memorize anything. There's just one trick. He's a teacher and he did tours in Australia teaching that trick. Right, so as one of you said, had I been taught a different way, I wouldn't be, having these anxious moments. And when we make children forget their past and rely only on what the teacher says, where's the well-being there? This is the slides that I was going to bring today. But it doesn't matter. We will sort of play with imagination today and we'll do something else next time I see you. So we need to account for the differences, what the activities that we need to put in place have to enable children to do the things that generic attributes or capabilities are talking about. They are the most important things because most of the time, and I will show it to you, I wanted to show it today, but I forgot my disk. I wanted to show you how when you do, if you construct your reading activities or writing activities in relation to generic capabilities, you pull the entire curriculum with you. So don't have much, I don't know how far we will go today, but I will show you the trick where we will be just engaging our understanding of what meaning is and generic capabilities. We create the entire activity, then we check it against the curriculum, and you will be astonished how many outcomes from year 2 and 1 or whatever, or that will be an activity for year 1 and 2, how many outcomes from the curriculum you're going to actually comply with. And never looking at them to begin with. So what my students usually do, they write lesson activities and they pull out. People think of lesson of curricular outcome as a shelf in Woolworths. So curriculum to my students very often is a big Woolworths market. Here are shelves, here's stuff on them. And they say, today I'll pull this one. Tomorrow I'll do this one. In a week's time I'll do this one. And what it results in? Why children quite appropriately, by being creative and thinking people and not mentally unhealthy, they don't have amnesia. They extend the boundary. They have a larger perspective on life. But we have read in the curriculum that by the end of the lesson, they no longer extend the boundary. They draw triangles. And then Ken Robinson, and we do it consistently for every lesson like that, and when Ken Robinson reports the research, he says, they were geniuses to begin with, they ended up, well, what's the word? Conventional. Come on. Because we have removed the perspective from their heads. That extended boundary that makes us remember that things are connected and in perspective. We remove it from them because when we see a child drawing a square instead of a triangle, we think there's something wrong with the child. What on earth put that conclusion in our mind? I can tell you what. Do you want me to hear? Do you want to hear? Your teachers. This is what I call the pedagogy by rumor. They did it to you, you do it to others. And just goes on and on. It is self-evident, Anya. Here's the square, here's the triangle. And what does the neuroscientist show? Here are the bananas, and there is a perspective. Nobody drew bananas exactly as they were on the picture, except for people who had memory problems, who had processing problems. They lost the capacity to remember that to actually sort of perspectivize the whole thing. So if none of the professors and all these important people drew it the way they should have been drawn, those bananas, are we going to tell them that they are retarded? They don't meet curricular objectives? It's a survival mechanism. And I'm not mentioning these things for nothing, because you have well-being capabilities in your curriculum, and emotions are nothing else but your survival mechanisms. I created this thing for today, but I just can't display it for you. When you mingle with children's brain, with their survival mechanisms, what do you do when you force them to, at the end of the class, you all will be recognizing this or that? Why is that mattering? Why is the detail mattering? Oh, Anya, it is mattering because I went to Woolworths, which is called curriculum, and I picked sugar for today. And we're going to do sugar today. Okay, well, where are your generic capabilities? Anya, they're only in curriculum on page 1. They're not relevant. Oh, really? I actually know a lot of professors who actually were there when the curriculum was being written, and it was a real bun fight. And they didn't put these generic capabilities for no reason. They're not there to please Kevin Rudd or whoever now is in charge. You can see how long ago. I'm not very updated. So if you start structuring your activities by thinking of generic capabilities, which is critical creativity, critical thinking, social capacity like self-awareness. How are you going to put self-awareness when you want to make them today to do triangles, to do the thing that you picked as an outcome for today? But you do self-awareness when you give children tools to explore themselves in an activity. Then they go, whoops, I've never heard it like that before. Whoops, I didn't realize it. At no point here you say to them you are deficient. Team building, another capability. So self-awareness is really good. It also goes together with lifelong learning, even with little ones. It's not about putting them off from learning. It is about seeing that learning is not a school thing. It's just doing life. There's a lot of study I'm doing. I was invited to submit. If you're an academic, there's never a quiet day, and things fall onto your plate. So I thought I just had one grant for this year and applied for another one, but I've got another one on my lap at this very moment because I got accepted to submit a full application now, and it is with Malaysia, not with Professor Koo, but her university. Anyway. So with one of her colleagues, and I'm reading now speed reading articles on literacy in Malaysia, especially English literacy. And I can look at what these articles, when they mention what problems students have, what things they come up with. And it's always your usual, words, grammar, the kind of detail that actually doesn't matter much. And it will fix itself in due course, provided other things are in place. But because other things are not in place, therefore everything suffers. So in my other lecture notes, which is there in modules, and I will put them also into this lecture once I am actually putting it on LearnLine. You find things. Are you aware of Professor Phil Cormack? How I use Professor Phil Cormack in my lectures in the modules? He's done research on genealogy, which means the history of the reading classroom. It wasn't him doing research. It was a grant that University of South Australia got, and they've done a pretty extensive research on genealogy of the reading classroom, and it's very interesting how he shows that nothing has changed. Before I draw you the model, why do you think things take a long time to change? That is true, but if something works, but now we have to understand what it means that it works. So if something works, why fix it? It ain't working. But who is saying that it's working? The teachers are saying it's working. The lecturers say, sometimes they say, oh, just do that, because very often lecturers come from the teaching environment. So you are a teacher first and then you become a lecturer. You've been so exposed to that, and if you lived in the paradigm that make children stop drawing squares and make them draw triangles at the end of the thing and turn curriculum into Woolworths, if you believe in it, then the 19th or 18th or 17th century methodology, let's call it 19th century methodology, so we say it works. What we don't do is critically look at ourselves. This is why I didn't devise the assignments for this unit. They came with the unit. But I find them, I could have changed them. I had the, let's call it power to do that. But the more I work with them, the more I find them amazing. Because we as literacy teachers want our children to be critical. But when we write our assignments for Anya Lyon, we say, well, I'm literate, I do Facebook, and I read books, and I read books to children. Where's their critical? So what Phil Cormack is showing is whatever we do to children is one thing, but for sure, being critical of ourselves is not the thing that we do at the level of a system. And I'm not saying that there are no great teachers out there, because there are. There are great principals, great teachers, and maybe change will take some time, don't know how many decades, en masse, to change that everything changes. But if he's writing in 2010 and publishing in 2011, that's very close to today. He didn't write that. They didn't do this research years ago. They did it just recently. And they produce very simple graphs. And I might actually remind myself, because I have my computer, so I can actually call the file to give it to you exactly how they do it. So the Woolworths model, when you look at the curriculum, the way how Phil Cormack actually produces, identifies it. And it's, I don't know who is Lancaster, but it's called Lancaster's monitorial system. That's what it's called. So they produce two drawings, two graphs of it. So the Lancaster's monitorial system, you can hear it's about monitoring. And you can hear that very often in curriculum, this word monitoring is coming through quite frequently. There is more emphasis in school structures on pedagogy. There is more emphasis on assessment. People think that assessment provides feedback. But even if it does provide you feedback, it provides feedback the way you understand it, not the way child understands it. There needs to be greater focus on what we do as teachers. So here's this monitorial model. There's knowledge. Then we develop amazing activities. Everybody tell you anyone can do that, right? You go have dinner, people say pedagogy is just some activities, and then you act on pupils. And then you say this is I'll add to it. And then in order to be complying with discourses, not necessarily with the truth, but with discourses, you say, and children do it themselves, and they are engaging, and they think critically, and we have happy class. Not that the model actually demonstrates it. The model is like this. There is a power of someone who selects what is relevant. And it's usually the teacher, the way how the teacher understands the curriculum. So his critical thinking of a model. Knowledge needs to be translated into activities so that teacher's understanding of the curriculum is then translated into how to apply it, how to make it happen, how this knowledge is to be transferred, dare I say, like from one bucket to the next bucket. And then we just pour it onto children, those activities. So the activities are to take children to the land of promise because they will learn the knowledge for the day. Remember the picture when I said they have to learn what things are and what things are not? Well, there's nothing like that here. The thing you need to study was taken from the curriculum or from what I call the Woolworths shelf, translated into activities, poured onto children, and in order to make it palatable, we put a discourse to it, attached it, and we called it how children do things themselves. No, they don't. Surely if you ask them to do some things, of course they do it with their fingers and with their eyes. But they didn't have any choice. Oh yes, they could have chosen scissors as opposed to knife. I mean, children are not in control. They are an object of your thinking. And as I said, to make it palatable or whatever, we just then add some words, engaging, self-centered. I don't know what else I wrote here. And there is your method. And then people will say, teaching is art. There is knowledge, but how do you translate this knowledge into activities? It's an art. And you go, gee, I never thought I was an artist. How will I do that? Well, have a look how others do it. And here you go, the pedagogy of Ruma. Learning theories. That's a good one. Nobody knows how learning happens. But we have learning theories. We'll back it up with some sort of framework. A student of mine is writing to me today, Anya, should I call it constructivism? And I said, in order to say that people construct knowledge, do you need a theory of constructivism? No, Anya. Well, why marry and block yourself by someone's theory when you can just say, the framework that I'm working with understands that children build on previous knowledge. And this form of building and reorganizing is called they construct their own experiences. That's it. You don't have to put any ism after it. Be modest and clear. Because very often people don't understand what a particular framework actually involves. And if they read the whole thing, they'll be amazed how much they disagree with it. There's no need to go into isms. So he's saying that's a 19th century thing. What it did produce as a result, what he calls this congregation type of pedagogy, where I wish I had that slide, it's so funny. So this is You have to guess. I'm not sure if I've shown it before in this class. What do you think? What is what here? So we've got this thing in the center, and then we have that. What do you think it's that? What do you think these circles stand for? Perfect. And do you think what that stands for? No. What made you think it's the teacher? Because there's nothing else. There has to be a teacher in the classroom. That's a good survival scheme, survival instinct. Well working. But the reason why I took you through this exercise is that you actually understand the model. We assume that teacher-centered pedagogy requires the teacher in the center. But it doesn't, and it never did. It never did. What we have here is the book. Children get the meaning out of this book. I don't know how you can understand Anya unless you also knew Janet and Sue and Peter and Gavin and Jolly and blah. You can't understand anyone if you haven't seen anything else in life. But there's a single book, all children are, you can see that in the past. That's a model from the monks, right? It was the Bible in the past. So the model carries over to 19th century industrial age. We put the book, and where's the teacher? The teacher is monitoring that all goes well. Children don't have to understand, they just have to behave in the way that the teacher ticks off. So what happens, children produce this, they take the meaning out, I can't even use those words because they're so far away from my intellectual framework, but I don't even have them. But the children take the meaning out of the book, then they send it to the teacher. Did we do well? And the teacher responds, yes or nay. Yeah or nay. Yes or no. So the teacher is the monitorer. Children comply. The book has everything. It's an infinity sign. Because a word contains all words, which is true. But you can't see it unless you actually play with different words to actually see that that is true and what that means. But they don't allow you for that play because in 19th century they weren't really interested in you to be able to see that what it means that the word contains all words. They didn't want you to be critical and philosophical. They just wanted you to read the manual so you can be a worker. A nice secretary. Just if you can read the instructions. So the instructions came with a printing press, and was a great tool because you didn't have to have apprenticeship schools set up in every factory. Provided that you actually went through the schooling system, you could tell the difference between B and T, and you were taught to take things as they are. And the problem is that people, even if they did read instructions, they had to still have some form of apprenticeship because there's no way, meaning is not in words. Now I give you an instruction of a recipe to cook something like a Polish dish, and you'll be so lost because sometimes people assume knowledge, and it's not in those words, it's in the practice. It's in the protocols we have in our bodies. Like a colleague of mine asked me a question about technology yesterday, and I said to her, she misunderstood it. I said to her, that's not the question to be asked. And what I meant by it, it is so reflecting her lack of any knowledge about computing, any. She can't even log into Google. She doesn't even have a Google account. She doesn't understand how to have your own account on YouTube. So none. In terms of ICT, she does have great literacy skills with Word. So with publishing tools. So there are things in between. And that's why I said we need to allow children to explore those things in between, the things that help them to become increasingly precise in about how to work. I absolutely resent the idea that we read text. We work with text, but that's a little bit postgraduate. We work with text. And I'll tell you why, because we read text for a purpose. You learn from Vygotsky and everybody else that all action is purposeful. So when we read, we don't read. We read it with a purpose. So we don't actually read. We actually work with the text, even if it is for leisure. We actually do things to it as we are actually interacting with it. So the idea of a perfect meaning, or the idea that you get the meaning out of it, is just theoretically not coherent or consistent. Doesn't make sense. The purpose comes from your body. Therefore, your body will be imposing that purpose on the text. As a result, you don't read it, you actually work with it. And it's very important because that liberates you now from the single book. And I'll show you how. So what we have is we are now basically trying to kill the idea that pedagogies were teacher-centered. They weren't teacher-centered, but what they were, the teacher was the only one, and maybe not even the teacher, but the syllabus, the kind of practices that were required from the teachers. But let's call it a teacher. The teacher was in power, determining what will be taught, how it's going to look like, and what will be the outcomes. And this model is still in the curriculum. You can actually play with it, but it's there what they believe for clarity. But unfortunately, it makes things very confusing. So here's your knowledge for the day from the Woolworths, here's your activities, and here will be the outcomes. And every student, when they write to me stuff, they say, well, and then there will be the assessment. It's always this assessment, it's always this assessment. I'm happy with an assessment, provided we actually understand what we were doing in that activity, in that unit of work. And it's this part here, the knowledge and activities, that need to be problematized in order for you to actually know what you were after. Notice that knowledge doesn't really say anything about the graduate, the generic capabilities and social self-awareness and all that stuff. It's just knowledge. And everything else is on top of it. So I see in schools now, some schools in Darwin are implementing from Deakin. There's this resilience curriculum. Deakin produced these books, and it's really funny. I mean, the whole thing is so confusing. Are children resilient? Are they born resilient? Surely they can feed themselves. But have you ever tried to tell to a child that they are ugly? What do you think? I mean, you can put yourself emotionally in their shoes. If you told a 5-year-old that they are ugly, what do you think the reaction will be? Right. Have you ever tried to tell them that they are incapable of something? You're worse than your brother. How does the child feel? What do you think is resilience? Is that awareness, I'm good. What do we do in schools? We take it away from them. We prove it to them. Not as good as she. So when we have years of training children to compare and contrast themselves, And television does the other thing, right? Which is she's better looking than you. This one is doing better in literacy. And you never do what I told you to do. Please don't be disruptive. Hands on head. Just to have peace in the classroom, right? All these activities. I was watching this, I couldn't believe it. It just would not work in Europe. I don't know how it works here. You do it to Europe. I don't know, I'm generalizing now, but I just can't imagine in classes where people are. Anyway, so maybe it depends also on the country. I don't know. Anyway, it's difficult to generalize. So what the schools have now, like the ones I saw, they pick up this magic tool produced by Deakin University, which is called Resilience Syllabus, and it's got these activities and all of that. And they have special hours to teach resilience curriculum every day. It's almost like a human being is divided into different things. At home you can laugh, at work you're not allowed to. In literacy classes it is about competition and getting it right, but in the resilience curriculum we tell you you're good. I'm just saying that don't remove it from them in the first place. Then you will not have to make them come to work, to school early, and instead of playing for an hour, you will not actually have to drill the resilience into their heads. They might explore the concept of resilience in the context of their projects, as they also are exploring themselves, and as you are accounting in your activities for self-awareness. So there is room for resilience building, if we were to call it this way, in your regular classes, maths, literacy, anything. And the principle is allow their histories to be engaged. Just because you didn't, that doesn't make them bad. It just makes room for you to reflect how you can complexify. I know it's not an English word, but I made it up and it works for me. So how you can complexify your classrooms. It's not about dragging them from squares to triangles.